Hello. Oh, San Mateo's not that far from me, Juliet. Hi everyone, how are you doing? I'm going to be working on this painting today. It's one of the pieces that I have for an upcoming gallery showing in New York in a few more months. So this is destined for my gallery show at Haven Gallery in May of this year. And it might seem like it's early on in that timeline schedule, but for me actually it's coming down to the last month of work that I will be able to do for it, because after I finish the paintings I have to do, well, I don't have to, but I want to create more of my laser cut fancy custom framing things for the pieces in this series. And so I've got 6 or 7 large paintings that I'm going to need to get started on that phase of work for this, which means that I have to finish the actual paintings themselves by the end of February, kind of at the latest, because then it takes like a month, 4 to 6 weeks basically, to do a whole batch of the fancy framing things that I do, especially for these larger pieces. So by larger I mean things that are generally at least 2 feet in one of their dimensions. You know, smaller pieces I have are up to maybe a foot in their dimensions. And actually I could show you, give you a sneak peek at one of the smaller pieces that I've got. This is one of the smaller sized paintings. And this is a mermaid. And she's in one of these custom laser cut jobs that I do. But this piece here it's about a 15-inch diameter. So if you look in my previous story that I had just before I got on live here, so the one that I posted maybe half an hour ago, you can go back and check it later if you want, or you can look at it now. I show you what the overall sketch is like for this painting, as well as its full dimensions. So it's a 15-inch diameter circle. And I just started working on it yesterday, I think. And I've been sort of mulling over the concept for this piece for a few days. And then yesterday I finally got around to sketching things out, at least in the rough sketchbooky thumbnail phase. And then in turn working that out into the larger format for the final painting. And I think it was only this morning that I finalized the sketch on my watercolor paper here and started working on it. So this is the very early stages of a piece. I can also give you a quick glimpse, if I could find them, my sketchbooks, of the sketchy phase versions. Oh yeah, so this over here was the very, very first concept thumbnail sketch that I did months ago, actually. I think this was maybe 4 or 5 months ago where I scribbled this. And I knew I wanted to come back to that concept, but it took me until now to finally get around to doing it. Where is the more finalized sketchies? Oh, actually, I guess I never even did anything more tight than that. I did a secondary one of basically that same thumbnail here, and then I started because I wanted to have this fiddler up here in the right corner, and so I started working on various poses for her. It took me a while to settle on something that I liked. And then the funny thing is that once I settled on the pose that I like and I sketched everything out here, I haven't 100% decided yet, but I don't think she's actually going to be a part of the painting. It turns out that I kind of like it as more of a landscape world type image rather than something that's going to be figurative. And I kind of struggled with that initially because I had this fiddler in mind as being the focal point of the piece initially, and so I kept sketching her in a way that was giving her focal point treatment as well as the size of the figure, and it just wasn't really working with what was going on with the rest of this piece, especially after I started focusing in on this door here. And I wanted this door now to be the focal, and it was kind of vying and struggling with this secondary focal point. And so I think in the end, after checking in with a few other people for opinions about it to see if I wasn't just going crazy with too many choices and things, I decided actually to take her out, or at least if she is going to make her way into this piece, it's going to be in an adapted, smaller silhouette form, perhaps, rather than as a focal, central figure. And I might use the sketch that I had for her in a separate or another larger piece, maybe. That's kind of the fun things also with the gallery show series of pieces that I do, because sometimes I do a piece and then I have some small element in one of them that I like, and rather than struggling to make disparate elements fit together in a single piece where they are warring for attention, I pull out some element of it and save it for maybe a different treatment in a separate painting, so that they're kind of linked, the pieces, and they have this kind of core, like thread that moves through them, and they can each focus on what they need to have as the star for their own, each piece on its own. Sorry, words not working there too well. Oh, anyway, let me see what comments here I missed while I had that long monologue ramble. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in and joining me today. I know this was a little bit abrupt and random, deciding to do this, and I have heard the request for trying to do some kind of regular streaming session time, and I haven't been able to really nail myself down to a schedule with that, so I apologize, and it will probably continue in this haphazard way where it's just like, oh, I feel like streaming today, and then I can give you maybe half an hour warning before it happens. So I hope that's okay, and I try to vary the time, actually, because if I'm going to do it at varied times, I might as well make it so that people in different time zones can join in. Moses 7 says, I saw your work at Modern Eden about 2 years ago. Such a great show. Thank you for coming to that. I had one over there earlier this year, too. I guess, actually, no, the one I had earlier this year was the first solo show that I had at Modern Eden. Prior to that, I've been participating in their group shows. But January of 2000 was the first solo that I had there. I still have a couple of my pieces from that show, so if you're ever in the area, you can check that out. And I do have another solo show scheduled for Modern Eden coming, but not for a while. I try to space these out. So my next one is at Haven, the upcoming one, and then the one after that is going to be at Modern Eden in like another year and a half after, so probably like 2 years from now, I think. So it's a ways off. It always seems like it's such a long time away when I schedule it, and then in no time at all, those months kind of fly past, you know, especially this past year. I guess a lot of people have felt that way with COVID and everything. But, you know, before I even realize it, it feels like, oh, it's time for my next show. All right, let's see what else people are saying. Adventures Woodwork says, what kind of brush is that? It's super interesting. This is a handmade brush by Tracy Levinson. I will link that later in the description of this video when I archive it, so you can check there. But he hand makes brushes for his natural hair brushes. He uses either renewable hairs, so things like goat hair, which does not harm the goat to remove and use these hairs for, or upcycled things. So if it is a sable, he finds something that is already in existence that is sable and no longer used, and repurposes those hairs. But this is one of the synthetic ones. I like his synthetic brushes quite a bit, actually, and they are some of the only synthetics that I have used where I don't eventually get a little hooked or, you know, kind of messed up tip to the brush. Let me see if I can find some other synthetic in my collection to show you what I'm talking about. If you've used synthetics, you'll know what I mean, where the tips of them eventually kind of get munged up and curl. But it has not yet happened to any of the ones that I've gotten from Tracy. I don't know why. He also gives a 10% discount if you use Stephanie as the code when you check out. So that's just something I remember. But yes, let's see what else is there in the comments here. Forever Wolf says, I can relate to the whole changing concepts thing for pieces a lot. I can rework a concept for a week. Yeah, sometimes it sits in the back of my brain for months. Even, well, yeah, actually, this is one that did sit in the back of my brain for months. So I like having things sort of hanging out in the background, even when I'm not actively working on them. So it's nice for me to work. I don't work on multiple paintings at any one time. I'm very one track as far as like having something on my desk and actively in the process of being painted. But the background stages of building up to that, though, I actually do love to multitask and have many things sort of working in the background of my head and sort of working themselves out structurally and in the composition and all of that stuff, so that by the time I'm ready to put brush to paper, I'm pretty confident about what I want from the painting. So I like having layered deadlines in that situation. Well, I don't like having deadlines. I like working on my own schedule, but when I do have to have deadlines, I like to have them kind of layered like that so that I can have the freedom to work around them, you know, and to explore ideas and figure things out before I get to the stage where I have to actually begin the painting. Zoom in over here so that you can see better what I'm working on with this right now. What is the theme concept for this show? Well, since it's my own exhibition, I get to dictate what the theme for it is, and it's about, well, it's I haven't figured out the title yet, but it has something to do with gardens and growth and nurturing things. I've had a tough time this past year in finding the right headspace to create art, but at the same time I've found a lot of ways to be extremely happy as well, and to find a lot of joy, even within all the craziness that we've been experiencing. And so that's sort of what's percolating into the overall theme that I've got going here. So I usually save until the last minute the writing of the artist's statement for the show, but I like to sort of test out the various concepts in my head, and I sort of scribble out and write, in a journal I keep, various thoughts and concepts as I'm working through the months on a project, because a lot of times these emotions and things that I'm working through in my head and feeling, these are the things that work their way into the paintings. And so it's a good resource to have if you're ever going to be doing something like this. Keep a journal and start writing down all these random thoughts that occur to you, because those are going to be reflected in the artwork. And that's what art is, right? Let's see if I can move this so that my hand doesn't block as much when I'm painting. It's always hard to find a good angle for both the lighting and the painting and everything going on. Indigo Dandy says, "Are you a millionaire artist?" I'm looking to move up from my box. No, not a millionaire artist. Well, I don't know. What do you mean by that? What colors am I using now? Okay, hold on. Let me find my color listing, because I dropped it. I don't know, can you hear me? Because I dropped it on the floor earlier. All right, and I never remember what colors I actually stick into my palette, because I just put them there and I know what they are visually. I can just look at them and use them, but I don't pay attention to what they're actually called. So what I'm using here is, let's see, Daniel Smith Geothite is this brown tone over here. It's one of their mineral pigments that is very beautifully granulating. So that's great for this wall, and you don't see it as much in this tight dry brush work that I'm doing, but some of the other areas you do get some of the granulation. So right over here in the washes that I did initially in the beginning, that was before I turned on the camera, so this was earlier today, but you can see the speckling pattern and stuff. That's the granulation that happens with some of these granulating pigments. So that's Daniel Smith Geothite. I'm also using some Daniel Smith, let's see, quinacridone Deep Gold and quinacridone Sienna. Those are not granulating pigments, but they are staining and just beautiful tone and color to them. So that's what has really brilliant luminous quality. Green Gold is what the pale lemony yellowy colors are over here. I just did a light wash of them initially around where my gems are. And the blue of the door so far, so this is just the base coat. It's going to be having a lot more rendering and layers that are going to happen to it eventually, but those are Roman Sesmal, Ocean Blue, and Cobalt Teal. And the more I use the Roman Sesmal paints, the more I really like them. I wish they came in tubes. That's my only complaint. All right, so yeah, stuff like this, I just very slowly build up lots of layers. And so it's just very gradual work. It's very meditative in a way. There are glazes and in areas where I'm really doing some detail fine shading work, I do dry brush, but you know, stuff like over here, I'm just glazing, and then I blend out the edges so that it melds with all the other surrounding existing stuff. Ooh, a bit of chunk over there. Chunky pigment somehow got in there. But yeah, my little mini palette here is a mixture of many different brands at this point. I have primarily Daniel Smith in there. I really enjoy the granulation that happens with Daniel Smith. Also, Roman Sismal stuff is some beautifully granulating ones as well. But I can't fit it into my little mini palette that way because they don't come in tubes. But let's see, I have primarily Daniel Smith, but also some Winsor Newton, some Renaissance, and I thought I had one other brand. Oh yeah, Holbein. Holbein's the other one. I like the blues, a lot of the blues that Holbein has. Let's see. I think Daniel Smith came out with a blue that I really like this past year. I can't remember what it's called though, so sorry, that's not very helpful. Maybe I'll remember and I'll put it in the notes later. As I said, I'm really terrible at remembering the names of the colors that I'm using. I know so many other people who are amazing with knowing exactly what the pigments are in all of the colors, and they'll just spit out the pigment numbers, codes, without even thinking about it. And for some reason, that just has not clicked in my head ever yet. And I would say that my brain just doesn't work well with that. Like, I always hated memorization stuff when I was in school. I mean, if I sat down and studied, I was pretty good at it, but I hated doing the study, and it didn't come just really naturally to me. And I would have thought that, okay, so that's just how my brain works, except for the fact that when I got into succulents a few years ago, and I started, you know, hanging out on the Facebook succulent groups, and people would be posting pictures, and others would be chiming in with exactly what the species was, with the scientific, you know, Latin name of it, and I thought, there's no way I'm ever going to remember any of that stuff, because that's just what I was like when I was in high school and stuff, in college. And then, you know what, a few months into my succulent fanaticism, I found myself being able to memorize 10-syllable names without even thinking about it. I mean, without even trying. It was just soaking into my head because I was into it. So I don't have that excuse anymore of just not being able to do it, because clearly my brain is capable of that without even very much effort. But for some reason, pigment codes has not done that. Pigment codes have not soaked in. So I don't know. Our brains work in weird ways. What type of paper do I use? So I am using, and this is a common question I get asked every time I stream, is Moulin de Roy. It is a discontinued paper, so you can find it in a few online stores. They do still have it, Moulin de Roy hot press, but it is no longer being actively made. And Canson is the one that made it. They have a replacement line of paper out. I can't remember what that one is called. Someone maybe will chime in and mention the name if they remember. But it does behave differently than the Moulin de Roy. Moulin de Roy is something that a lot of painters who work in dry brush detail-y stuff seem to really enjoy. A lot of the botanical artists are really into it, and that's how I actually came to it as well, because I also do a lot of botanical art, and even when I'm not doing botanical art, my style is very similar to that in some ways, in the very dry brush, fine detail way. Latarte Mole says, did I try the metallic watercolors? I have tried some. I've tried several different brands. let's see, Daniel Smith has some. I wasn't super into the Daniel Smith ones because they felt more glittery than I like, and I like something that's more smooth and that feels more metallic. And let's see, there's several different brands. I've also tried. Oh, all the names are slipping out right now. The ones I use most lately are their Artistic Isle ones. Those are handcrafted also by Lindsay. She's also here on Instagram, and I will link that as well later. But what I like about her metallic and duochrome pigments is that they meld very well with the rest of my watercolor paintings. So some of the others that I've tried, especially like with duochromes. So there's a number of different brands that make duochromes, and sometimes while they look amazing in very concentrated form and in the right light, when you dilute them and try to make them meld into a very I don't know how to explain it. The way my watercolor paintings are, like, a lot of things just sort of melt into one another, right? I don't have hard edges or lines super often. And so because of the way I use paints and because I use them in a very dilute form like that, a lot of times with these duochromes that look amazing when you have intense chunks of them in a piece, they don't look so good when they are diluted and the pigment and particles are spread out. Because then you sort of get this either glittery look or else a dullness, because they only seem to work well when really a large concentration of the particles are clustered together. So that's kind of what I look for when I'm working with duochromes and metallic things. I want something that is going to work well with my particular painting style. And so for me, so far, of the ones that I've tried, I actually like Lindsay's Artistic Isle the best for that. iuile is another one I've tried. Hers are absolutely gorgeous if you are going to use them in very concentrated form. Like, I used them when I was making my three-dimensional butterflies. I don't know if you remember those. Some of you who maybe tuned in last year when I was working on some of these for fun. For the duochrome on the wings, it's hard to see it in this lighting here, but it has a gorgeous like teal to purple shift. But I have to use it in a very concentrated form and to really get it thickly layered there for that beautiful effect. But used in that way, it is absolutely gorgeous and beautiful. So, that's the way with any tools and any materials. You have to find the optimal usage for them, and you have to examine how you use your materials and your style of painting or working or whatever it is that you're doing, and then find the materials that are optimally going to help bring out the qualities of your way of working. So it's something that's going to be unique to every person, every artist, because we're all going to work in different ways. We all have different techniques. We might admire a certain artist and want to emulate them, but even so, you're going to be working in your own method, in your own way. So you'll have to try things out and find what suits your work the best. Let's see, how long have I done watercolor? And was this your first style of art? Someone is asking. So I have been, let's see, I would say the first time I did watercolor, treating it as a serious medium, because I played with watercolors when I was a little kid. I had little kid watercolor sets. It's an easy introduction medium to working with color and brushes and paint, right? We all have the cheap sets that you use in grade school. But the first time I thought of it as a serious medium that could be used to create sellable artwork. You know, work that I could do and use for, you know, doing contract work at the time, because that's what I was doing. I was doing a lot of game contract stuff. Was, let's see, 2001. And so I've been doing it for 20 years now at this point, watercolors. But it wasn't an immediate switch over for me. It did immediately win me over, because I loved it from the first instant, when I first tried it and decided to approach it with that mentality. I loved it. And I decided to work more and more with it. At that point, I'd been doing some acrylic, and because that's what I did in college. I actually did get an art degree, but it was a modern abstract expressionism fine art program, and we were not allowed to use watercolors, so I used acrylic. And hold on, I gotta go turn off that thing that's beeping right now. My apologies. And where was I? So I was talking about, what was I talking about? Easily distracted here. Acrylics and stuff. Okay, so I was doing acrylics, and on the side I actually started doing a lot of digital work in 1998. You can keep in mind, so it's not nearly anything like what you see digital is capable of today, but it was starting to be viable. At least I could see it being viable as a real tool for artists. Most people still didn't really understand the potential of it yet, and I got a lot of weird looks for doing any digital work, and in fact I got yelled at from my art advisor for even considering it. They were like, why would you even want to do that? They were not happy. So I think that it was in a reactionary way, because in some ways I was just angry about being put into this box with abstract expressionism, that basically in all my free time I was working on the side with Photoshop and just playing with it and getting and learning, you know, what it was capable of. This was Photoshop 1.0. And you know, GIMP was GIMP was actually developed in the Berkeley at Berkeley by some lab partners of my boyfriend back at the time. I remember them making GIMP. It was this small little private lab that they had access to, so there was only like four to six people in there at any given time, and a few of the guys were working on this little side project, and they named it GIMP because Pulp Fiction was super popular at that time, and they just thought that the GIMP in Pulp Fiction was the most hilarious thing. You know, it's a bunch of computer science guys in college. And then they attributed, you know, this acronym to those letters, which is the graphical user interface, whatever. But I'm telling you, that was the real reason why they named it GIMP. But yeah, so watercolor. So I first kind of picked it up in 2001, after I left. No, had I left yet? I had left college, so I was 3 years out of college, 3 years away from all that abstract expressionism and illustration hate and everything else, and I picked up watercolors and I loved it. And it took a little while to transition fully over to using watercolor, because while using digital was not accepted initially, in that time frame it became a real thing for the illustration
for working in illustration. And so while people were starting to use digital more and more, I was switching over to watercolor. And a lot of my clients at that point were used to me working digitally, and so I was still asked to do a lot of my work in a digital format. And for the pieces that I was doing for myself, I began to use watercolor more and more often. And as I expanded my portfolio of watercolor work, then people were able to see what I could do with watercolor, and then I got more requests in a professional venue to do watercolor as well. So it took maybe 3 or 4 years to fully do the transition over from digital work to watercolor work as a professional. But by maybe 2007, 2008, I was really fully invested in watercolor and pretty much not doing any more digital at all at that point. When did I publish my first book, and what was it called? I think, I'm not sure, let me think. There's a few of them. I can't remember which one came first. The first large publisher that published something for me was F&W Books, Impact Books. They did the technique book that I had, the Dreamscapes book, Fairies, Mermaids, and Angels in Watercolor. They were the ones that came up with that title, and they came up with the subject for it as well. I had done a free little tutorial on acrylics on elf wood, and the editor had come across that little tutorial that I wrote, and so she decided to contact me and said, hey, we're looking for someone to create a tutorial book, and we'd like it to be about mermaids, fairies, and angels. Are you up for it? And I said, yeah. And she says, okay, so we'd like to do, acrylic like you did in this tutorial. And I said, well, actually, I don't really work in acrylic anymore. Can I do it in watercolor? And she said, yeah, sure. So I did that, and it was a really good move. It actually was great for my career because it got my work out in a lot of venues where people outside of just specifically fantasy genre were able to come across it, like craft stores and places and school libraries. I have so many people come up to me even these days now, and they say, hey, the first time I saw your work was in this book that I checked out from my school library, and it's so amazing to hear that. Yeah, Elfwood, I really liked Elfwood. It was kind of ahead of its time, I think. And I think if Thomas had had more bandwidth to really pursue it, it could have become much more. But it was sort of the first social media space for artists in a time when that didn't really exist yet. And he was working on it as he was also in a university, and same as the GIMP guys, he was just kind of working on this as his own personal project. And but it became a lot of work, and it consumed a lot of bandwidth, and I think it was really hard in that era to find an affordable way to deal with that much bandwidth. And so that was a constant struggle for Elfwood's continuation. Yeah, Elfwood was in the mid '90s. I think it first came into being in '95, I believe. I got into it in about 96 or 97, I think. Fairly early on. I remember a friend of mine saying, hey, you should check out this thing called Elfwood I just found. I said, what's that? So I'm still pretty much in the mid-range of layers with this piece here so far. I still have to build up a lot more shadow depth, and then I gotta pull out a lot of these really bright foreground elements. So these are going to be little green sparkling jewels that are inset into the wall, and the gold of the door handle and the knocker and everything. So there's still quite a long ways to go with this. This has been like, what, 45 minutes of me chatting while doing these gradual layers. And it will probably take at least another 45 minutes to get this small section into anything close to a finished state. But I am going to actually have to end this session for now. I might do some more later this evening if anyone wants to join me for that. But here's a view of what I've got so far. So it's coming along, but it's still got a long ways to go. Anyway, thank you everyone for joining in here for this short little bit today. Hopefully I could do another one sometime soon. And this video will definitely be available in the archives in my IGTV section of my feed. So you can find it there. It'll take me a couple minutes to upload it. And I will add links there to all the stuff that I have used or talked about, materials-wise and things, so that you can have that for reference. And thanks again very much. Bye.